I contend that the immigrant population is more likely to be housed than unhoused, in the sense that the immigrant population leans on each other to survive. But the more they advance and the more they grow, they become isolated. Once when we come to this country, we always work together as a team, and then that generation continues to grow to the point where they get independence. So you're more likely to find immigrants living together, right? Cousins and brothers and all of that, whilst they're still struggling to find their feet.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again to the Immigrant Pod. My name is Martin. I am your host. And guess what? He is back. Today on the Immigrant Nation Pod, Arrey O'Benson, a global voice in immigrant advocacy, former CEO of IISTL, and author of Bridging the Opportunity Gap. Tribe, did you know? The greatest injustice is unrealized human potential, especially not because of where someone comes from. To deliberate on this narrative, we have Arrey O'Benson. Mr. Benson, welcome. For you, what has been the key driving force behind your deep belief in the power of citizenship, opportunity, and inclusion of immigrants, especially in North America?
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to continue this conversation about really just the role that immigrants and immigration has played in the advancement of, I would say, human civilization, if I can frame it that way. But if we look at historically, whether it's the context of the United States or it is the context of the world itself, you would see that transformation has always happened when people have traveled and picked up knowledge, experience from other communities around the world. You can go, as we talk about, you know, the advancement of Europe with just their traveling across the world, finding spices and minerals in different parts of the world, which went back and led to the Industrial Revolution and progress that has been achieved in Europe. And even if we look at the United States and the arrival here of people from the West, Columbus and all the people that came to the United States, that actually led to the transformation of this country. So you never know where that transformation is going to come from. But like I said the last time, if you look at the United States and look at, the Fortune 500 companies, 44% of the Fortune 500 companies are actually started by immigrants or first generation immigrants. And now we're beginning to see second generation immigrants actually. I don't know whether how far down the line we go in whether it's second, third, or fourth generation immigrants, but we're seeing more and more the economic landscape of the United States itself transformed by the impact of immigrants. Now, somebody once told me, I used to belong to an organization called Junior Chamber International, and the founder of that organization was somebody called Henry Gissenbier. And if you listen to that name, it's a name which originates from Germany. But that organization went on to have an impact around the world. I think we have an echo somewhere as in the recording. Yeah. So that and each year, so as part of that organization, which I was secretary general, I always took board members to the graveside of the founder of the organization. And it was very interesting to look around and imagine, to your point, how much of the knowledge that we have within us ends when we are buried, right? Our contribution, it's here whilst we're alive. And no matter where we are, we have a role to play. So we immigrants, wherever you are, the impact is enormous. The history of the world tells us that knowledge comes from across. across the oceans and makes a difference in the lives of people.
All right, looking at, as you refer to it, the history of the world, I can trace immigration back to human civilization, modern, or however anybody wants to look at it. And very interesting. Immigration has come with pros and cons, right? Immigration gave birth to slavery. Immigration gave birth to international prostitution and international rings, and on and on and on. But on the positive side, immigration has given birth to international trade, and a lot of wonderful things come with that. With that said, if we really zero down on what's going on in North America now in 2025, the Trump administration is executing what is it calls the largest domestic deportation operation in U.S. history. As someone who's worked directly with immigrant communities, what do these policies mean for families, of immigrant families, neighborhoods, and the economic future of cities like St. Louis that you worked in?
Well, thank you because for bringing this up. This actually zeroes down, as we have this conversation federally or nationally. Really, when where the rubber meets the road is in local communities. And let me take the case of St. Louis. Like many Midwestern cities across the United States, um, these communities are aging communities. The population, we're having more deaths than births. So the death rate is higher than birth rates. We are seeing in the St. Louis community 65% of outward migration of people who come to our universities. We are seeing significant gaps in the labor market as we look at the healthcare industry, where we're seeing significant shortage in labor and also turnover. We're seeing gaps in manufacturing. We're seeing gaps, shortage in labor in the trades. Now, the silver lining for these communities, the communities in the Midwest, St. Louis, Detroit, Columbus, Cleveland, all of these communities, Indianapolis, the silver lining for them is that they have one, colleges, universities that attract students from across the world that come to study in those colleges. And some of them eventually, not all, some of them eventually stay. So that's a silver lining. Secondly, there have been opportunities to resettle refugees within those communities who eventually become part of the labor market and help fill some of the gaps, right? And but we're seeing that shrink because of the current situation with the federal government, um, essentially um, shutting down the refugee program, as it were. And then we're also seeing a significant reduction in just tourism of people coming, moving into the country in any shape or form. Even the application for green cards and citizenships, we're seeing a significant decline in that. So, what does that mean for these communities? Well, essentially, that means that we are going to continue to see an increase in cost of labor because of a shortage in labor. That's what the laws of demand and supply. But we're also going to be seeing a significant decline in population. Now, the St. Louis Public Schools, for example, has 68 schools. I can tell you there was an article that came out yesterday where about 37, almost half of those schools are going to be shut down in the next year as a result of declining population. What does that mean in terms of security, in terms of the economy? Because as schools shut down, means that there are going to be their homes that are abandoned, homes that are not refurbished, which means that they become abandoned and it creates gaps in the community. What happens to people who are not graduating from good quality schools? They are not absorbed into a very tight labor market because they're not producing at the level that they should be. They're not reading at the level that they should be because declining population means a decline in resources that supports the educational system. And so the quality of education is just going to be going down. The impact is enormous. As people talk about this at the national level, we cannot lose sight of the impact that is going to have on communities in the Midwest like St. Louis.
So, Ari, I find it very interesting, right? Because when you start pointing at numbers like that, my head goes to what to me is a very interesting demographic that's going on right now in North America and especially in the US. At least we know on a daily basis there's somewhere between 10,000 to 11,200 baby boomers that are retiring after the age of 65, right? And what we've noticed now is that those boomers, they're living longer, right? Which means they will need people to take care of them. Or besides living longer, we also know that they are downsizing their houses or moving to different states. We also know that they will need. They're leaving their businesses behind. The majority of them are shutting them down rather than selling them because there's nobody to buy. And there's so many of these many things that are happening in our economy today that all attach what used to be sustained by the basis of immigrants that are migrating to the country. Now, one portion of immigrants that are coming to the country, for example, refugees, has been stopped by the current administration. So when we start looking at these numbers, how is that slowly starting to affect our local communities? And how should we prepare now in the age of AI, knowing that robots are going to be part of our day-to-day lifestyles in the next 5 to 10 years?
It this way. I just put something out on my LinkedIn last week, which was really talking about the American story, and it was really my story as an immigrant, saying, you know, I came to this country with a suitcase, and but this country has given me a stage, and I have a responsibility to use that stage to support anybody who comes after me to this side of the border. And it's important because I find myself in St. Louis, an immigrant in St. Louis, really thinking about the future of this community in ways that somebody who was born here and lived here may not be thinking about it. And why do I say that? Because to your point, the baby boomers that are retiring may have the infrastructure as a result of their being born in this community to gradually move them into retirement, right? Everything they planned was planned at a time that was different. And now, when we started our conversation just before we went on air, we're talking about how fast the world is changing, right? In that article, which I put out on LinkedIn, one of the things that I said is that it's incredible that we're getting to a point where we are outsourcing care. If you think about outsourcing care, it's kind of a paradox in itself, right? Because care means personal, care means presence, care means taking care of. But where we're getting to that point where we have to think creatively of ways in which we can do that, right? We can fill the gaps of care in ways that, for example, we have to start thinking about how we build as well as how we build for workforce, right? So think about it this way. Everybody, if they had the opportunity, would like to work remotely, right? That's the new world in which we are in. Unfortunately, there are certain things that cannot be done remotely. How do we compensate for that in the future going forward? Well, if you're going to build a senior living, right, in one community, it may make sense to build a community next to it for the staffing, right? Because nobody wants to be driving 45 minutes to a job, right? And that's those are ways in which you can compensate for the AI world in which we're going to live in, where people can also, yes, of course, there's now all sorts of telemedicine and telesupport and all of that. But care is something that we would not get to the point of using robots to care for our aging population, maybe in the next 50, 60 years. But as we think 5 years and 10 years down the road, we have to think creatively about how we do that. Do we go back to the system where you're not just building the company, but you're also building a community around the company that enables somebody to be able to, within 5 minutes, go to the gym, within 5 minutes, be at the workplace, within 5 minutes, access groceries? Those are all things that we have to be thinking of, and that I'm thinking of as we build a new community for the future. For me, that's how we have to look at it. Now, when we talk about AI, obviously there are certain jobs that used to be the jobs that immigrants come and pick up on the factory floor, those kind of jobs that may not necessitate the use of language. But with AI and technology, that is transforming, and many people fear that it's going to create a stress in the labor market. But that was the same fear we had when computers were coming. Jobs like secretaries were on the line. You know, some of us started working. I started practicing law, and I had a secretary, and we used a dictaphone. But now I have to, as things evolve, I type everything myself. But also the job descriptions changed. We moved from secretaries to executive assistants who were doing, some of the work, but doing it in a different way. And so the jobs are going to evolve. Even on the factory floor, you're still going to need those foremen. You're still going to need people that are going to be punching those buttons for the machine to work. Maybe not in the numbers that are needed, but we're still going to constantly need people. We're still going to need to build roads. We're still going to need construction. We're still going to need people to do the roofs on our homes and all of that. And maybe the scale and speed is going to be different, but there will still be gaps in the labor market that people will need to fill.
Seen the president bounce back and forth on who's to be deported and who's not being deported, and that's a conversation I think by itself. That's just a whole episode by itself talking about that. In reference to what you just clearly articulated, if I look at what's going on, Gen Z is different from previous generation, right? When it comes to home ownership, not because they don't want to own homes, but because they are facing new and intense barriers that did not exist for baby boomers or for Gen X's and millennials, if I may put that in the same scale. Uh, if we break down why Gen Z seems different, and how Gen Zs are interacting with immigrants at the moment, the things that stand out for me, for example, is home prices have dramatically gone high, and the home prices have gone dramatically high because of inflation. Inflation, inflation being the cause of home prices going up, among other factors, is also becoming an issue when it comes to affordability, and so it becomes difficult for Gen Zs to earn enough to be able to decide they want to stay in homes. At the same time, we're finding baby boomers who want to downsize from these homes and go to smaller quarters where they can be able to afford their current lifestyle comfortably and be able to continue to live a comfortable life. So America at the moment is at $36 trillion and growing in debt, and we're paying somewhere close to $2.5 billion every day on interest on this debt. I can't stop wondering what would happen to this beautiful country if the $2.5 billion was applied to my community, to your community, to develop my community or your community in the way you're starting to articulate it, which makes a lot of sense in terms of how do we develop our communities for the future. What is the role of immigrants who are currently right now in the US in terms of their political power and determining what the future of immigration and immigrants is going to look like here in North America and especially in the US? And how do we identify that role and sustain it for long term?
A very interesting conversation, and which is an ongoing conversation amongst particularly the African immigrant population, because we've been having this conversation on something called Global Africa, right? Because the African immigrant population is now global, in the sense that we're scattered all over the world, and we need to start, you know, pulling together our weight, and particularly here in the United States. But the immigrant population, I keep saying it, and I said this the last time we met, has to define the future of America. America has always been defined by the immigrant population, and in the past, and will be defined in the future by the immigrant population. And I know that we as immigrants, myself included, we have the tendency to see ourselves outside of the political realm, in the sense that we always think, um, you know, I am half Cameroonian, even though I've lived here for 22 years, I still play a role in Cameroon. I want to see Cameroon develop. But I've also contributed significantly to the development of this country, the United States. I hold a citizenship here in the United States. So I am an American, and I must see myself as such. That means, as a citizen of the United States, I have tremendous responsibility to contribute to the future of this country. And just as much as any other American that was born in the United States, or whose father or grandfather was born in the United States, as a citizen, we have equal responsibility. Not one citizen is more American than the other. With that in mind, we have to play a role that is larger, and we may even have a larger responsibility, because for some of us, we have seen the other side of democracy, or the other side of authoritarianism, coming from Cameroon and from several many African countries. We've seen how a rich country, rich in resources, because of the government system, could be so mismanaged that it presents itself as a poor country. And you can qualify that as well in the United States. With the economy of this country, with it being as rich as it is, we should not be in a situation where 1/3 of the population is living close to poverty. It is just a paradox that is unacceptable, that we walk down the streets of St. Louis and we see an increasing number of people that are homeless, that we see crime, that we invest more money in fighting crime than investing in building new homes, that we invest more money. So when you hear people talk, we're always focusing on the challenges that are faced, right, within our communities, but not much more of radical new um, solutions that could be transformational. Now, when you have been in the same community all your life and you have not experienced something else, it's rare that you're able to change and embrace something new. But because some of us that are coming from different parts of the world have experienced the worst, we could be able to bring in new ideas that could revolutionize, that could transform the United States. And I think that that's the value that we immigrants bring, because there's no reason why we should live in a country like America and everyone not have access to the same healthcare, right? There's absolutely no reason, because this country can afford it. But because the country has been used to one system, they're stuck with it. And it will only take new ideas and new people to the table to make that transformation. And so immigrants bonding together, even as we talk now, very interestingly, about cuts to USAID, cuts to foreign aid. Like, I say to people that, as an immigrant from Africa that has worked and is paying taxes in the United States, I should be able to play a role in determining where the funding goes. And I want to hold my Congress people accountable for defunding vaccines that goes to Africa, right? Because there is a strong connection between my presence here and the people that I left back in my home country. I should want that to happen, just as I would want that to happen if I were Jewish, or and I would want to see funding go to Israel. Why would it not be the same for me wanting to see vaccines go to support? If the United States is going to be putting money anywhere, I want to see that it's also going to what I consider my interest. So that's the kind of conversation. We cannot just be carried away with our own survival as immigrants. No, it's more than our survival. It's more about the role that we play in our newfound home, our newfound country, America.
Ari, if I may play devil's advocate, and I truly do empathize with your point of view, right? But let me create a scenario for you here, right? Um, Majority of Americans would beg to differ with your perspective, and the reason why I say that is because I came across a video of the former president of Kenya, right? And he said Africans or Kenyans specifically should stop crying that America is not funding programs in the African continent anymore, because America does not pay taxes in Kenya, but Kenyans pay taxes for Kenyans, right? And so Kenyans should benefit from their own programs or should devise programs that benefit them. America should create programs that benefit Americans and people within the region of the USA. At least in my perspective, that's how I look at it. In this one very narrow perspective of looking at life, I do agree with the former president of Kenya, right? However, when you claim the position of the leader of the world, you do have a responsibility to the rest of the world. And that responsibility has to be defined by your national agenda. So, USID and any other programs that have been cut, I don't think we've done enough cutting, if you ask me, right? And I don't think we've cut in the right places because nobody's touching the DoD yet, where we have the most of abuse, right? So it's very interesting how the cuts are occurring, but I don't want us to lose our conversation and where our conversation is zeroed down, right? It's zeroed down on the influence of what the representation of immigrants who are in America today is supposed to be moving forward.
Yeah. If you don't mind,
Go
let
ahead.
me. So the one doesn't negate the other.
Okay.
Africans have to bear responsibility for their development. The one doesn't negate the other. Two, when we talk about international cooperation, International cooperation, yes, it's been defined as aid. But when we look at, yes, we see USAID is international development. People qualify it as aid. I don't see it necessarily as aid because international collaboration is very important. Let me use an example. If you recall, there was a time when there was an outbreak of Ebola in Western Africa, in Sierra Leone and Liberia. And the world was really alert as a result of that. And because of international collaboration, we were able to contain it. I think it went only to like 4 countries. And that in itself protected Americans. Yes, it went into Africa, but it also protected Americans, protected many of us. And so when you begin to look at things like that and you're pulling out of a global vaccination campaign, we begin to see the rise of measles in the United States. We begin to see that, so that it's more nuanced than that. But now, but how does that connect to the influence of immigrants in the United States? So as you think about, you just mentioned we're funding significant increase in in the Department of Defense here in the United States. You know, we are investing more to blow up homes and people and countries than we're investing to build up people and create opportunities for children that are born. We're investing more in destruction, right? In weapons of mass destruction, you can call them that way, in drones and all of that, rather than building more schools and making homes more affordable for the next generation of Americans. And we have to be able to see that as immigrants and be able to call that out and say, yes, America wants to be strong. We want to defend ourselves if we're ever attacked. But we have to prioritize human life as opposed to the.
So, talking about the priorities of what our communities should look like and the contribution of what immigrants in these communities should look like, I cannot walk away from the fact that housing is probably one of the most, or if not fundamental, basic human need to be able to develop our local communities, even here in North America. Homelessness continues to be a huge issue in North America, right? And it's there's a myriad of reasons as to why we struggle with homelessness here and across the globe. Um, to mention but a few, we struggle with homelessness because of mental diseases, right? And the lack of proper, coming back to you, of care for our citizenry, right? Uh, Lack of affordable housing, which we've been touching on, right? Because of poor planning by those that we elect in offices, or if you ask me, our inability to separate government and business, right? Um, there's poverty, right? And poverty comes from a lack of proper education and tooling your community the right way, on and on and on and on, including substance abuse, and all that. I am very convinced, in my own little ignorant world, that if we had a problem in America that we needed to solve, we can fix it. We can fix housing, but we don't need to fix housing. We can fix mental issues, or we can have a remedy for it. We don't want to do that. Given as immigrants, we identify the issues that we have as a nation. How should immigrant parents continue to support their children, continue to support Gen Zers, so that as they start to mold and shape their future, they're actively participating in politics to be able to bring in these programs here and in the future that allow America as a nation to develop our local communities to be able to compete internationally.
It would be an interesting research to do to find out how homelessness impacts the immigrant community, how mental health or the impact of mental health on the immigrant community. I don't have those numbers and I don't have that research, and that's maybe something that I will take up and be interested in. But I contend that it may be low. I mean, compared to the general population, and if that be the case, and I may be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong, I hope I'm not wrong. Sorry, I contend that the immigrant population is more likely to be um, to be housed than unhoused, in the sense that the immigrant population leans on each other to survive, but the more they advance and the more they grow, they become isolated. Once when we come to this country, we always work together as a team, and then that generation continues to grow to the point where they get independence. So you're more likely to find immigrants living together, right? Cousins and brothers and all of that, whilst they're still struggling to find their feet. And because you have community, you're able to survive and not be on the streets. You're able to maintain mental health, right? Because the best way to be stable is having family and care, and people around you gives you some kind of mental stability. I think that this would be really interesting to find out. I would also be interested to see how that changes as those communities grow and become independent of each other, and whether as we move from you living together, move from inner cities to suburbs, how that changes and how that impacts our mental health. Because that would be a good case study to really determine how we can be involved in this conversation. But as we look at the question, if housing and homelessness continues to be a problem in this country, as we look at what's happening in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and many parts of the country where homelessness continues, here even in St. Louis continues to be an issue, we have to, as immigrants, begin to think about new and creative ways to build. For example, I keep asking myself why we build in America with the materials that we build. Like, why do we use the material that we build? Even though we know that the climate is changing and changing fast, right? Where we're seeing a lot more downpour, more aggressive storms, and yet we've not seen an evolution in the building material that is used. Where we're still building in many parts of the country with wood, where maybe we need to start thinking about building with something that is more resilient. Will that mean more cost? And if it means more cost, how creative can we be? Do we need the large size houses that we're building here? Do we need to look at other parts of the world and bring in those architectural ideas that can be transformational, climate resilient, more sustainable, and more affordable? And that's always where the immigrant idea comes in, because you're bringing people with different perspectives and they're able to transform. I have, I've spent time in Japan, and stayed in a hotel where there is an earthquake, and I see the building actually move forward and backwards, and it's scary. But I know that this building is not going to go down because it's designed to resist that earthquake. So we have to embrace those different perspectives and bring our ideas to the table. If we stay in the fringes or in the margins of society and only take care of our families, our children, provide for the next generation, then we can only complain about what is going wrong with society. And that would have an impact on our children. But if we play a role, if we start going to those school board meetings as well, if we start participating in local politics, if we engage ourselves with groups, we don't have to be defined by left or right. What we need to be defined by is human dignity. That's the most important thing for us. We didn't come to this country on a banner of conservative or liberal. We came here as human beings seeking to survive and provide for the next generation. And that should guide us on this path to having the America that continues to be the beacon of hope for mankind.
So, if I listen to what you're saying, in the back of my mind, I am thinking about things that start to put water in my stomach, if I'm gonna put it that way, right? And so I say that because there is an immigrant that I find very interesting, and I've been following him. Zohran Mandani is a Democratic mayoral nominee in New York City, and he has a very interesting approach of how he is looking at solving problems in the US, but and specifically for New York City, right? But when I look at his proposals, I can't help but remember failed states, Zimbabwe, um, and a few in South America, right? The ideas is coming with a little bit scary in a environment that has been created to support capitalism. So when you sit back and you look at the atmosphere we are in America today, when you look at the role and responsibility of immigrants today and in the coming years, we have a responsibility, if you ask me. And that responsibility is to make sure that we contribute in a way that is building America for a future that we still remain competitive and care about human dignity. How do we not find ourselves lost between the politics of socialism and capitalism, but really focusing on solving the problems that immigrants can really zero in to make America or continue to develop America as a great nation in the world?
Yeah. This morning I was running an errand in Walmart, and I heard a woman say to somebody on the phone, "That's not how the world works." And I kind of thought about that phrase all the time as I was picking things on the shelf. That's not how the world works. But that world is a world that was created by us, right? Nope, the world is defined by the people in it. We have to be able to remake the world, right? And I know that for the last 80 years, there has been an unfounded, well, let me not say unfounded fear. There's been fear of that another system could come and destabilize capitalism. For those who define the world in terms of capitalist and socialist, um, you know, that has been a thing that emerged essentially in the 30s and 40s and consumed the world, actually led to a schism in the world over 50 decades. And Mondani is a first generation immigrant from Uganda, actually. And you can this is exactly what I'm talking about, that the future of America has to be defined by people who have seen both sides of it. There is nothing you can define it as capitalism or socialism, but we're at a fork on no, let me say crossroads, historical crossroads, where we really have to define beyond communism, beyond socialism and capitalism. Yes, some people have given socialism a bad name, but I can also tell you that people have given capitalism a bad name. And we have to even challenge the status quo to define what capitalism is, or newfound capitalism, or where the limits or the shortcomings of capitalism is. Because if capitalism itself was all just good, then we shouldn't be having the challenges that we're talking about. The reason we are having challenges is because capitalism itself has its cons and as well as has its pros. So you need to challenge the status quo and find out what are the limits that we've seen 100 years, 250 years into the existence of this country. Are there new experiments that we must try? And yes, every new idea is of in fact, if an idea doesn't make your heart boil, if an idea doesn't challenge you, then it's not innovative enough, it's not radical enough. I think that maintaining the status quo doesn't solve America's problems. And so, yes, you need people with radical ideas, and maybe we land somewhere in the middle and we're moving society forward. But one thing is certain: affordability in housing is a challenge, transportation is a challenge in the United States. You need homes, you need transport to get people to work. So, which means labor in itself has to be redefined, the workplace has to be defined. How we treat workers has to be defined. How people retire has to be defined, as we see a significant number of people that are going to go into retirement. The educational system itself has to be defined. These are all things that will determine whether America continues to maintain its position as a leader in the world, which we certainly all want it to be. But we can only do so if we think about how we put value in human dignity.
Very interesting. That puts my mind somewhere else, right? There's this very profound statement that I have on my office wall. And it's based on the writings of the US Constitution back in 1787, where it says, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union." Right? And for me, I've always thought America has 300 plus years of an experiment, right? And obviously, for an experiment, you have successes and failures, mostly failures, right? Because it's in
Yeah,
failures where you find the way forward, not
yeah,
perfection, but the way forward. Because for me, a democracy will never achieve perfection, but it allows itself the opportunity to thrive on the idea of perfection.
yeah.
As a nation, we've demonized immigrants quite a bit. I think the demonization is not just a rhetoric in America only, but it's a rhetoric across the globe. And like you said earlier, about 44% of uh, Fortune 500 companies are built by immigrants. 16% of Fortune 500 companies are ran by immigrants. And on and on and on. You can look at this beautiful work of immigrants from when America was discovered to today, where doctors have changed how we do medicine because they're immigrants and they have a different perspective. You can look at how we educate our children, and on and on and on. And so, while the demonization seemed to have taken center stage, you and I do have a role. What is our role?
Well, our role is to play a part in, that I spoke about, that proverbial stage that we have, that America has given us, to play a part in demonstrating to the American population that the immigrant is me, the immigrant is you. The face you see is the face of an immigrant. My contribution to this country is the same kind of contribution that millions of immigrants are making. And just like everything else, there will be experiences that are not the best, but there is more happening, that more that our immigrants are bringing to the table than being destructive. The American um, lifestyle is one that is embraced by immigrants. Every immigrant that comes to this country wants to be more American than every other day. They want to they want to understand this country, and they want to play a part. So we all have a megaphone that we have to continue. We have great responsibility to demonstrate that immigrants are active and good citizens. One, we also have the responsibility to educate our neighbors and friends and colleagues and business partners that immigrants don't come to take, they come to give, they come to contribute to the evolution of this great society. And that's our responsibility, which means that um, we we do not have the choice to be passive in this process, because we can't wait for somebody else to do it. We, each one of us, has to play that role in inspiring our American neighbors to understand that we are just human beings too. We are just seeking, or the immigrant is just seeking to prosper, to provide for the next generation, to attain their greatest potential, like everybody else. I always say that, let us not allow ourselves to be told that the order is wrong and what we believe is right. Let us be able to put ourselves in a position where we can walk in the shoes of others. And I can understand why somebody whose family has been here for 4 generations could be concerned about people coming into the country and having the belief that they are taking a lot more than they are giving. That is only what they are told, but that's not really what happens, because people who come here make significant contribution to the future of this country. In fact, I dare say America will not be America without the immigrant population.
Ari, I want you to hear this number out because it's a very important number, right? In 2023, the Financial Times released a number. It said $657 billion is exported by immigrants outside of America. That, for each and every American immigrant, is a very small number or small portion of their contribution for what they generate in this country to help families in other countries, which allows those nations that they came from have somewhat of first stability. That guarantees, to your point, security in other forms for the American people and the American nation. The contribution that immigrants contribute in this country is way significant than that. Unfortunately, these numbers are not shared in the public forum. And you and I have done a disservice to immigrants to not have created platforms in the past where this information is disseminated and actively educate our communities on what our impact has been. I say that because while we've had a tremendous contribution to North American societies, and while there's this huge push against immigrants, there's still goodwill among the American people toward immigrants. And that goodwill is evidenced by you and I who've been here and have been able to determine and to succeed based on the path we wanted to take. Looking forward, walk us through what you think we need to do to fill up the gap, and that we work toward a goal where indigenous, if I may, English is a tough language.
Yeah.
If if I may use this word, for immigrants, for white Americans who do not understand immigrants, can take an interest in understanding the contributions of immigrants and their role in society, and how we should move toward a more democratic nation.
Yeah. I think you make some really good points there. America, as I've studied it, doesn't have an immigrant problem. America has an immigration problem. And I think that those are two different things, because we all are immigrant we immigrants live in communities where we're embraced and we're accepted and we play a role. I mean, obviously we run into challenges here and there, but that's a conversation for another day. But obviously, it is not an immigrant problem, it's an immigration problem. And that immigration problem is more structural, meaning that it with legislation, with the right laws, with the right rules and regulations, it could be managed in a way that serves the interests of the country. Unfortunately, it's become too politicized because as you look across communities, you see communities, local communities embrace immigrants who are contributing constructively to the development of those communities. It becomes something else when that immigrant begins to play a political role. Then it may become challenging because then we go into other things which are in the DNA of the country itself. So let me just qualify it that way. Let's, as immigrants, really highlight, as I look at the state of Missouri, for example, we know that the immigrant population contributes about 5.3 billion to the economy of this state. Now, you can talk about how much of that money goes out, but money that goes out to our various countries is commensurate to our contribution, because if you do not have, you cannot give. So that is actually testament of how much immigrants are working here to contribute to paying taxes, paying rents, becoming employers, becoming employees. You know, 1 in 5 small businesses in this country are run by immigrants. So you can go on, and we need to tell those stories as opposed to highlighting the challenges. And sometimes it is lost on everyone when we highlight the challenges. This is the essence of an entire book that I wrote, is just how much we are wired to look at the problems as opposed to the solution. Going forward for this country, there has to be a reckoning of how we create an immigration policy. By some means, we have to create an immigration policy that is friendly towards ensuring that we can constantly have people that support the economy, because we're going to live, grow older, and live longer. So we need people to be in the workforce to generate revenue that will sustain social security. So we need that policy to be able to do that. We need a policy that will ensure that we have people that can care as we grow older. So that policy has to be introduced. But we also need a policy that will ensure that we continue to stay younger in population, because aging population is a recipe for economic disaster, and we need to start thinking 50 years ahead. We are seeing countries like Japan face significant challenges because of the population that is aging. But I can tell you what, this whole anti-immigrant sentiment, we have a political party now in Japan that has just had 16 seats in parliament, but that is strongly against immigrants, and that's a country that is isolated. It's an island. So what happens in America has tremendous impacts across the world. This anti-immigrant sentiment doesn't end here, it continues around the world. So we have a responsibility to lead the world, to see that people to see in people humans, and create the opportunity for them to have the dignity to support one another, to support us, And yes, they do not have to stay in America, but they can come to this country, they can support the growth of this economy, and they can go back to their countries. The free movement of labor has always been what has driven capitalism, so too will immigration.
Mr. Benson, more than 1,000 international student visas have been reportedly revoked in 2025 or in the last 6 months, often tied to student activism or what many consider minor legal issues. What message does this send to the global talent that is necessary for American future? And how do we balance national security with academic freedom and due process?
I would say that it's really is unfortunate that this is happening in America at this time. I went to university in Cameroon, and as a you know how universities are. As a university student in Cameroon, I was active politically, and we faced this kind of uh, clamp down from the government. And never in my wildest dreams did I imagine that we will see that I would confront this in the United States. Universities, the essence of universities as they've been created historically, was really creating the space. Universities were never really designed for us to get a degree, for us to read and replicate what we are taught. Universities were actually designed as they were designed back in Africa, as a place where people could, the first universities were started out in Mali. Uh, they were designed as a place where you could challenge theories, you could challenge the status quo, where people could have a difference of ideas, a convergence of ideas, hoping that that would lead to better results. And so it is completely unfortunate that we're seeing this, that people would leave countries where they didn't have the liberty to express themselves and come to a country that is designed to allow them to do that, and they are restricted. Now, what does that mean for the education on those campuses? It definitely means that you have students who are now here not to contribute, but just to get a certificate and leave the country. And that doesn't speak well of an educational system. And it is so unfortunate. Even as we think about it from a security standpoint, I think that there are ways and safeguards that can be put in place. By the way, it is never easy to get a visa to come into the United States. The security measures are actually put in the vetting process. Now, even to get a visa, your LinkedIn, your Facebook, your social media, all of that is looked at by the embassies of the United States to be able to grant you a visa. So there could be ways in which those could be checked. And obviously, we have laws in this country. Those laws, that there's due process. Now, we should let people be subjected to due process. Let the legal system prove that somebody has gone beyond what is expected of them legally, as opposed to arbitrary. I used to belong to an organization where one of the tenets of the organization, Junior Shema International, was that government must be of laws rather than of men. Government must be of laws rather than of men. And when that changes from laws to the whims and caprices of men, it challenges democracy.
When we started our conversation earlier, I quoted you, and here again I repeat the quote: the greatest injustice is unrealized human potential. In this current moment, with doors closing and fears rising, how do we make sure immigrant potential is not wasted, but protected, elevated, and celebrated? N- Knowing that at the moment there's what we consider brain drain. Reports show that American students and scholars are now applying to UK and Canadian universities in record numbers due to this hostile climate. Are we witnessing a brain drain in reverse? And how do we rebuild an image as a global education leader moving forward?
I would say if we look at historically, many, many hundreds of years ago, advancement of civilization was in Egypt and the Middle East and Mesopotamia and all of those places. They developed mathematics and all what we're leveraging today, the algorithms and all of that was developed in universities in those parts of the world. They started to see a decline when censorship was imposed on learning, when the kind of books that people had to read was defined by the powers that be, when books were banned, when certain aspects of philosophy was eliminated in society, it led to the decline of civilization in Northern Africa and in the Middle East. To your point, if we are beginning to see the outward migration of talent, the outward migration to universities in other parts of the world, it may be the definition of what the future of the world will look like. America has not always been the greatest in history. Like there's always been different empires, and none of us wish for a decline in, I want to be clear about this. What none of us hopes and for a decline in American dominance, so to speak, or American advancement. What we hope for is to be able to ensure that we continue to build a society that is advancing and creating opportunities for us to solve the biggest challenges that mankind face, to be able to 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 leverage the talent that we have to eliminate deaths from cancer, for example, to solve incredible diseases like ALS and Alzheimer's and all of those things, to solve the biggest challenges that mankind, whether it's in homelessness, as we've spoken about, and things like that. The only way that we can be able to do that is if we create opportunities for the human mind to achieve its greatest potential. And we cannot do that in the current climate where we are limiting the ability for the students who are in the factory of innovation from thinking and offering the best to mankind. So that's a challenge that we face. But it could also be an opportunity for the rest of the world to begin to think about where the next big guest empire emerges. The answer is definitely blowing in the wind. It's where the greatest opportunity lies. And being African and looking at Africa and seeing that that's the only continent that is growing, there may be an opportunity there. But who am I to predict?
Yeah, I think I do agree with you. Mr. Benson, you've worked to bridge opportunity gaps across cultures and borders, with policies now engineered to systematically exclude not just undocumented immigrants, but legal immigrants. We're seeing that. And students, do you believe we are witnessing the creation of a two-tiered society? What are the risks and what are the long-term risks of that structure?
Well, I don't know whether it's creating a two-tiered society as we talk about documented and undocumented. Um, you know, I've really not liked the use of the term documented and undocumented, just as I really never liked the use of the word alien. Um, but as you think about documented and undocumented, I say an undocumented person is somebody who doesn't have a birth certificate, is somebody who was not defined at birth, right? But anybody who has a birth date, has a name, is documented. And we can go into the nuances of, of saying have legal status in the United States, which is which is a very, very different perspective. But how the only way you bridge the gap, bridging the gap itself, is looking at the opportunity of how do you create a pathway to legal status in the United States. The entire world is not going to move to the United States. In fact, there was a joke that isn't it interesting that people will cross your border to work? All right, that's the essence of it. It's paradoxical that people will bring themselves to your shores just to work. And if that's what they're coming here, if they're coming here to work, then create a pathway. It comes back to a policy consideration. It's not immigrants that we fear. It is the immigration policy that's a problem. And so our role is trying to figure out a pathway that people who are here that do not have legal status can have legal status, as temporary as that may be, but value their contribution to society here, but also even where they come from. And I think that would change the perception of America around the world and would even change the way that people come to this country and support the growth of the economy of this country. Otherwise, because even as we talk about this conversation about immigrants, as if it is only the native-born Americans that are against immigrants, I really want us to understand that even immigrants, we as immigrants, are also against immigrants, right? Because there's a certain population of the immigrant population that comes here that sees the people that we call undocumented as a threat or as a burden to society. But the only way that you change that is if we can look at various pathways to allow people the status to work. Are there farmers that are coming to work on our farms? Are there people that are coming to work on the factory floors? And how can you create a 2-year process, 3-year visa, or 5-year visa that somebody can come and work, support this country, pay taxes, and then go back to their country and maybe stay for another 6 months or another 1 year, and then they can come back and work again, and that helps with our economy. But these are all creative ways in which we can transform the landscape.
I am very convinced, and I don't have data on me at the moment, but I'm very convinced most immigrants are not looking to permanently migrate to other countries. They are looking for opportunities to escape what it is that they're escaping from their home, be it economic or disease, or looking for education or other opportunities, but they're looking for a temporary fix to go back. Is that a false perception?
Absolutely not. I say this to many of my Cameroonian and African brothers and many immigrants that I say, for many of us, our stories as we imagine is not complete because we had all hope to go in search of greener pastures, go to the West, study, acquire knowledge, acquire wealth, return back to our countries, and contribute to the development of our countries. Our path to this dream has been treacherous because for many of us, that has not been the realization. We are aging in this country, and more we're living more of our lives here than there. And I would say it is not the fault of America. It's probably the fault of more from where we are coming. That doesn't enable us the opportunity to return back and thrive the way that we are thriving here. I would say it's more thanks to America that it gives us the opportunity to flourish here than our home countries where we do not have that equal opportunity to flourish there. Our stories will never be written as we had predicted, and that's our the stark reality that we face.
Mr. Benson, please tell our listeners where they can find you on social media and where they can find your book.
My book is available on Amazon, and it's now out also on Audible. So if you don't want to read hard copy, you could also download the book. Actually, Amazon is running a free download now with 3 months of membership for the book on Amazon. But you can follow me on X, A Obenson on LinkedIn, A Obenson on Instagram, and Arrey O'Benson on TikTok.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, you're listening to the Immigrant Pod, and today we are hosting Arrey O'Benson. The show today has been sponsored by a medical group of companies, private ambulance companies based in the US, in Florida, and in Texas. Ari, America has long positioned itself as a destination for global talent and innovation. But in this current environment, with travel bans, revoked visas, and closed academic doors, are we ceding that leadership to emerging nations like China? If so, what does that mean for America's influence and relevance on the world global stage?
I think last week I saw um, a survey result which demonstrated a significant decline in the perception of America. That more and more of the world is having a negative perception of the United States as opposed to positive. But even with that in mind, I would say to Americans and to the immigrant population that as you travel across the world, there is more people that wish to have the American experience than people who do not want to. More people would like to have their countries mirror the quality of life in America across the world. And unfortunately, that's not necessarily the case. I still believe in our lifetime, in the next generation, that America will continue to be a leader in the world, even if that leadership is diminished as a result of America's own internal political wrangling. It will continue to lead the world in that direction. There is also an opportunity for us as immigrants to help redefine what the future of America should be. And that begins today, begins with me, begins with you, begins with each one of us getting involved in determining the kind of America that we want for our children and our children's children.
Very interesting. All right, as we're coming toward the end of this episode, you've devoted your life to making sure human potential is never wasted. In this current climate, where it often feels like we're swimming upstream, what keeps you going, what grounds you, and what's your hope?
What keeps me going is my belief in human ingenuity, that human beings are essentially good, that we mostly wish each other well, but that because we are human, we are largely exposed to the trends that may sometimes tell us or lead us down the wrong path. But I think I am, I believe from what I've seen, from my experience across the world, that human beings are essentially good. And because we are essentially good, if we could get more people, more of the good to be involved, because there's a saying, if good walks away, evil will prevail. Our responsibility, my hope and wish is that I could touch any heart or soul that I meet, to become to contribute to the advancement of mankind, and that's really what drives me every day.
Thank you. Thank you so much for coming to the Immigrant Pod, and thank you for making the time for immigrants across the globe the second time around. Before we sign off, we have a new tradition. It's simple. What question would you want immigrants to ask AI today to help them in any form, and how would they prompt that question?
Well, I'll pick a question from the conversation that we've been having here. I would say, what is the impact on the increasing cost of housing on um, on on the homelessness of the immigrant population? I wonder what the answer would be.
Very interesting. Very interesting. All right, thank you. That's a wrap on today's powerful episode with Arrey O'Benson, reminding us that the greatest injustice is unrealized human potential. In a time of rising fear and division, voices like his help us reinforce our purpose, dignity, and inclusion. This episode has been brought to you by our sponsor, Medical Group of Companies, providing compassionate non emergency medical transportation and ambulance services across Texas and Florida. Learn more at www.medicaltrans.com. In today's conversation, please follow us and join our movement on social media on TikTok and Instagram at Immigrant Nation, Facebook at the Immigrant Nation Podcast, LinkedIn and YouTube, the Immigrant Nation Podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. This is the Immigrant Nation signing off. Bye bye, and thank you, Ari. We hope to see you soon.